A very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to this session, Online Women Violence and Awareness of Social Media. My name is Ajina Karki. I'm a lawyer in Nepal and working on women violence, and I'll be serving as a moderator for today. Well, in this session, we hope to focus on some of the important factors like online violence and that from a women perspective, role of government, online rights and principle, use and a role of social media, awareness of social media, similarly action mechanism and regular practice in Asia Pacific. Well, we have young and energetic panelists here with us today, and I would like to request you all to hold your questions before all the presentations are done. Well, to begin with the session, I would like to take a few minutes from your time where I will be sharing a brief overview on how women of a developing country like Nepal are facing online violence and what measures are being taken up so far. So, when violence against women is already a problem of pandemic proportion, the new cyber war or online violence against women has significantly increased this staggering number, as the research suggests that 73% of women are somehow facing or experiencing or they are exposed to some sort of online violence. Similarly, well, when we talk about Nepal, we have around 11.89 million internet users. And with the increase in the number of the internet users, the cybercrime has been increasing in the same way. So, and thanks to Facebook and Twitter and social media so far, so the users are increasing day by day. Well, there is a serious issue of threatening emails, revenge porn, porn content, and fake profiles in Nepal. Currently, that is a major challenge and a major threat. However, Nepal lacks adequate laws and regulations to control these phenomenon or you know, to deal with this increasing violence and harassment of women in cyberspace. We have Electronic Transaction Act and Defamation Act, which are dealing all these cases, and we still do not have the cyber law that is basically focused on dealing with all these kind of cyber crimes. So that is a major threat in Nepal at the moment. Similarly, every day up to 10 complaints are being launched by young women and girls regarding the online violence, stalking and harassment in the cyberspace, and that alone from the Kathmandu Valley, that is the capital city of Nepal. So you can imagine the number of the complaints that can have been reported, because in our case all the cyber related crimes are or have to be registered, or those cases are being taken up by only the Kathmandu District Court. So that is another threat or the challenge that people or the victims, they have to come to Kathmandu, the capital city of the Nepal, to come and lodge a complaint about it. And that is another threat or challenge, I would say. So, a lot of cases have come in where they first become friends via social media, develop a relationship, take and exchange nude photographs, and later are blackmailed for money or for sexual favors. So many concede that cyberspace is not women friendly, or it is not safe for women actually. So Nepal, and the another threat is Nepal does not have a clear and adequate laws that I have already told you. So that is another challenge that we are facing at the moment. And moreover, victims outside the valley are more at risk, since cases of cybercrimes are only handled by the Kathmandu District Court that I've already told you. Another aspect is with more people going abroad for work, many left in the villages have started using social media to connect with the loved ones. But the thing is, they are using the social media to connect with them, but they are not aware about the privacy settings. So they are going to the cyber cafes, they are logging in, they're talking to their person or the beloved ones or loved ones, and they forget to log out. And that is another major problem there. And as the number of users grow, cases of cyber crimes have spiked in recent years. Most of the victims are lured into friendship and relationships through social media and are coaxed into sharing nude photos, which are later used for blackmails. So these are some of the challenges or the threats that we are facing in our country. Nevertheless, looking at the threat and challenges, many campaigns are being launched in Nepal by the Nepal police itself, where young girls and women are being trained to use the social media. They learn about the privacy settings and the advantages and the disadvantages of the social media. Thank you. Thank you for now, and without a further ado, I would like to ask Gwen for her presentation. Gwen is currently a PhD candidate of political science at the University of Warwick. Her research focuses on political communication, democratization, ICT, and Taiwanese youth political engagement. She holds an MSc in political communication from the University of London, Royal Holloway, as well as an MSc in democracy and democratization from the University College London. The floor is yours, Gwen.
Thank you. So, when I need to change the slide, could I give you a sign so I can change it for me? Or do I have a remote? Oh, great. Okay. Brilliant. Which one do I press? This one? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Gwyneth. Today, I'm here to present my research and analysis on Taiwan societies and civil societies and their usage in social media and how they use social media and ICT tools to enhance their influence in the society and also at the same time raise public awareness on important issues in the political arena. And so, I'd like to use this to start my research because it's fun. So mooncake is a famous Chinese delicacy enjoyed by millions of Chinese people in the world. And people might not know that actually the story, the origin of mooncake was about a social movement in the 13th century. So back in the time, China was governed by Mongolian people. So a lot of Han people were thinking about how could they do to overthrow the governance. And so they made up this tradition. They told the Mongolians that, well, as Han people, we have to enjoy mooncake on this specific day each year. But little did the Mongolians know that they actually hid a message in the middle of the mooncakes. So they could share the mooncakes with other Han people in the country to deliver a message about when did they plan to start a revolution, when did they plan to attack the military. As a result, on the 15th of August in some year in the 13th century, they successfully overthrown the Mongolian region. So in the same vein, internet could be considered a type of mooncake, that people use internet, social media, and ICT to deliver some important messages they want to deliver with people with like-minded ideas or groups they want to influence. And so from Arab Spring and the Occupy movement in the Wall Street to Taiwan, there's a trend that social movement is becoming a more and more important changing force in the society. And that is Taiwan before Taiwan lifted up the martial law in 1987. So back in the day, there were still soldiers or military staffs that could freely shoot people or arrest people if they illegally form political parties or share messages which would have the intention to damage the government's control over the country. So there were some pictures I would like to share with you. For instance, this one is a logo with 3 soldiers underneath, and the logo means unconditionally obey our leader. And this is a photo in 1986 when people gathered together calling on the government to allow them right to form political parties, because before 1987 there was only one political party. And after after the martial law was lifted up in 1987, Taiwan's media landscape had changed a lot. Before 1987, there were only about 31 newspapers with license from the government. But after 1987, today we have more than 2,000 newspapers and more than 4,000 magazines. And not to mention that Taiwan has a very, very vibrant cable TV industry with more than 200 channels. So that's the reason why I decided to study how do ICT directly or indirectly help civil society in Taiwan to enhance their influence and to raise public awareness. And first, let's have a look over the digital sphere in Taiwan. So with 23 million people living in Taiwan, the internet penetration rate is really, really high with about 71%. And Taiwan is also one of the countries in the world with the highest number of mobile phones. I was told that Taiwan might be the number 2 countries where, Taiwan might be one of the 2 countries in the world that there are more mobile phones than people living in the country. So you might have heard of this movement, which is also so-called Sunflower Movement, happened in 2014. And this is really significant because that was the very first large-scale social movement initiated by Taiwanese students, and which allowed students to occupy the parliament for about 24 days. And this is also significant because the way students use social media was very, very unique and unprecedented. For instance, there is a picture of people using iPad and flip-flops to make sure that the tablet could stand properly and to live stream what was going on inside the parliament building. So what happened back then was, just let me give you a short introduction about the background of the movement. So before they broke into the parliament, the government was planning to rectify this trade pact they signed with China. So the trade pact basically will allow Chinese industries to invest, to do business in Taiwan in the areas of over dozens or even hundreds of industries. So a lot of people, and including then opposition parties, argue that, well, maybe the government should have consulted with the civil society first before they signed the deal, before they rectified the bill. However, the government did not really listen to the demand from the society. They decided to push forward the bill in a really, really rush manner. So as a result, in the evening of 18th of March in 2014, a group of students, they gathered around the parliament and they decided to break in. For some reason, they succeeded. So without very little plan in advance, they decided to use social media to garner other people to join them. So within 24 hours, there were about hundreds of people surrounding the parliament or inside the chamber to give them support. And also because there were so many people, in a few days, I think there were a few telecommunication companies. They brought their telephone towers so they could boost up the connection, the internet connection in the area. And so apart from social media, they also use other ICT tools to facilitate the movement. For instance, they use Hackpack, Lumio, crowdsourcing websites to raise public awareness and then to seek donations and assistance from people. So these are just some basic outlines of the movement. But what I found interesting is that this movement not only attracted hundreds of thousands of students, but also people from all walks of life. So this is not a pure student movement. It's a student initiated by a small group of people, but in the end, it got expanded into a really, really big national level. And after they finished the occupation, Taiwan society had this huge event, I think that was around the end of April, that attracted over 500,000 people altogether to call on the government to look squarely the demand from the civil society and then increase transparency in terms of trade negotiation process. And also there's another picture of a front page of New York Times. This is also something quite interesting coming out from the Sunflower movement. So around the same time, there was this unfortunate event where this airplane from Malaysia Airlines got missing. So in order to raise enough international attention, Taiwanese students, they decided to use crowdsourcing website to get funding so they could purchase the front page of New York Times. And within 3 hours, there were more than 3,000 people donated money with a total amount of 200,000 US dollars to allow them to purchase this page, to tell the international community what was going on in Taiwan and why the social movement happened. And why does it matter now? Because not only that the government decided to pause the negotiation process, but also there were a lot of small parties formed after the Sunflower movement. And also these events directly or indirectly encourage more young people to engage, to participate in politics in Taiwan. And on the left-hand side, there's a picture of a lot of young people scrambling in this small car in a train. They were going back to their hometown to vote, which was quite important because usually the voting turnout of Taiwanese young people was around 40%. But in this year's presidential election, the voting turnout reached 60 or even 70%. So that's the significance of this movement. And also, this is another picture of this man in the middle. He is wearing this yellow jacket. He used to be a rock star, but then after the movement, he received a lot of public support because of his effort in the movement, and now he is one of the small party's parliament members. And so, but today we're talking about cyberspace and women's violence. So I would like to connect these two topics together. The first one I just shared was about how civil society in Taiwan use ICT tools to engage with the public and then to raise awareness from people from all walks of life. And this one is about a very topical issue facing Taiwanese society, which is revenge porn. So according to an NGO called Taiwan Women Rescue Foundation, around 72% of porn victims were women, and they were aged between 21 to 35, and 6 of them were underage, with the youngest one is only 12 years old. And 61% of the images were obtained illegally. A lot of them were selfies. So basically, the picture holders sometimes do not have the rights to use the photos or even to share the photos at all. And then 24% of the victims were blackmailed by people who held their images, and another 24% of the victims said they were threatened by their ex-partners. And what kind of damage it had caused to the victims? Basically, you see the images were shared and posted on porn websites, or they were shared via those communication apps, like Line is the biggest and the most popular apps in Taiwan, and or they were shared on social media, for instance, Facebook. And 40% of the victims have taken legal action Among them, 44% reported unpleasant experiences when they talked to the government or relevant authorities. They said the foundation that sometimes they got this feeling that we shouldn't have taken a photo in the first place, otherwise we wouldn't become the victim of the revenge porn. So these experiences are quite discouraging and somehow became a bigger pressure on the victims. And currently, how does the Taiwanese government respond to this revenge porn problem? According to the criminal code here in chapter 16.1, there's a chapter focusing on offense against morality and basically Taiwanese government classify revenge porn as an offense against morality. So it somehow delivered this message that if you take the inappropriate photos with your naked bodies, then it is against morality. And that is something the foundation, also other NGOs and civil groups are trying to correct, that people are entitled to the right to take any photos they want, and the government should not impose any certain form of value or morality over people's behavior. And this is one of the actions taken by the NGO. This is a snapshot of a website called womanly.net. And on this website, there is a special section, a special page dedicated to revenge porn. They encourage victims who suffer from revenge porn problem to share their stories here, anonymously, of course. And it became really successful because over a year, I think in 2015, they got over 500 stories from victims across Taiwan. So that's a good example how NGO, civil society could work with those online platforms and then transform those negative experiences into some positive supportive tools to victims in the revenge porn problem. However, unfortunately, there isn't a very strong and coherent online campaign to combat this problem. So I'm here to listen to your experiences and also listen to your opinion. And I'm hoping that by sharing our experience in different areas, different regions of the world, we can together combat this problem, and then hoping that in this region, especially when a lot of women are still living in a suppressed society environment, we can deliver some positive support to the victims and also raise greater public awareness in the region. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, for showing an accurate and deep understanding perspective. And here I would like to add something as well. It has already become very important that government, regulators, businesses, and everyday netizens alike need to recognize and act on the basic principle that an unsafe internet will mean that women will frequent the internet less freely, with costly societal and economic implications. So having said that, I would like to welcome Noel to talk about the issue now. Noel is the Regional Program Coordinator for Asia Pacific at the Internet Society, ISOC. She has worked extensively in international development and media policy prior to joining ISOC Asia Pacific Bureau, where she currently handles regional activities to ensure that these are efficiently delivered and continuously monitored for impact. The floor is yours, Noel.
Sorry, Sajina. Can you repeat what you wanted me to address again, specifically? Okay. Okay, Sajina initially wanted me to talk a bit about what's happening in the Philippines, and also where I'm based. I'm a Filipina, and also what my organization, the Internet Society, is doing in this area. So I feel a bit out of my depth here because I can see at least several people who are much more qualified to talk about this because they are directly involved. We are involved in their activities, but they are the ones who are working on the ground, and I hope that they will intervene later. But in the Philippines, we can roughly see the same issues. We have, online harassment. We have cyber stalking. But another issue that is very present in the Philippines is cyber prostitution and cyber, cyber pornography. So as many of us might know, the Philippines is one of the so-called cyber sex hubs. Not a good reputation, but unfortunately that's one of the things that it's known for. So we see women who are being employed as cyber prostitutes, especially in low-income areas. So these are areas where women do not have a lot of options, and they're being exploited in that way. In terms of legislation, there we have the RA, the Republic Act 9262. Which was instituted about 12 years ago, but that does not that doesn't really address the online violence against women. So it's the anti violence against women and children law, and there have been, and then following that, there was also an anti-photo and video voyeurism act in 2009, which kind of touches upon some of the abuses that we see online, but not entirely. So since then there have been several proposals, both in Congress and in Senate. So amendments. Pretty much what they aim to do is to amend the present law from 2004 to include or to specifically address online violence against women. There has not been a lot of progress, and it just shows how high or how low this issue is when it comes to prioritization in policy. So some of the steps that are, some of the measures that are being taken, FMA, the Foundation for Media Alternatives, is very active in this space. We have been supporting some of their, a number of their activities with regards to gender and access. So they have, if I'm not mistaken, they've done several campaigns, including the Take Back Tech. And also, I think they've launched an app, and maybe Lisa can talk more about that later. But when it comes to how my organization, the Internet Society, is addressing it, we're addressing it from the perspective of access, but also human rights. Because at the end of the day, violence against women is a violation of human rights. So several things. One I've already mentioned, we support local organizations who are working in this area. We also, as you might know, we have fellowship programs, we have grants programs. So we've started to impose, especially in Asia Pacific, a gender quota for that. This is with the objective of getting women, building women's capacity to really become decision makers, to become experts in the technical and the policy arena. So we've imposed a gender quota, at least 40, as much as possible, 50% of these fellowships should go to women, and women from developing countries, from countries that are in need. At the same time, we also have access and digital literacy programs. This is in conjunction with providing connectivity, especially to low-income communities and rural and remote communities. And lastly, I don't know if this will come up later on, but somehow anonymity is also a relevant issue in this point, especially when it comes to women journalists or even thought leaders who are they somehow censor themselves because they're fear of repercussions, a fear of being abused. So it's important to also kind of reinforce or enable anonymity, and we do that in the Internet Society and online privacy as well. We do that through promotion of tools like end-to-end encryption. So I can talk about that for later if necessary. I think I would end my intervention there. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, for coming up with such informative insight. And again, I would like to add here something that various surveys have been done time and again by various organizations, and we need to take care of the age of the women or the girls that are being affected by the online violence. So there is this Broadband Commission working group on gender, and the survey was done in September 2015, and that suggests that women aged 18 to 24 are at heightened risk of being exposed to every kind of cyber war. So, and they are uniquely likely to experience stalking and sexual harassment, while also not skipping the high rates of other types of harassment common to young people in general, like physical threats. So, now moving ahead to our session, please welcome Nayanthara Ranganathan. Nayanthara Ranganathan manages the Freedom of Expression program at the Internet Democracy Project, where she works on the planning, coordination, research, and advocacy of projects related to freedom of expression issues in India as they relate to gender and the Internet, net neutrality, and surveillance. Over to you.
Hi. Yeah, as Sajina introduced, I'm Nayanthara from the Internet Democracy Project. I'm based out of New Delhi. Before I start talking about the responses to online abuse of women in India, I want to highlight a very important incident that happened recently. I don't know what to call it important, but it caused quite a stir in other parts of the world as well, and you might have heard about it. It was the murder of a social media celebrity in Pakistan called Qandil Baloch. It was an honor killing by her brother, where it was one of those awful offline consequences of women occupying online spaces for being unabashed about sexual expression on the internet. Yeah, I'll let my colleagues from Pakistan talk about that later, but I just wanted to bring that up in the first place to start off. Online abuse has been, Online abuse has been a problem that a lot of organizations have been clamoring for attention for a while now, but it has only recently acquired a lot of attention in the conversations about women's access to the internet. The Internet Democracy Project in 2013 did a study called Don't Let It Stand, where it interviewed 17 vocal social media users who were women in India, and came up with a bunch of findings. So the first one was that there is a wide range of abuse on the internet. Everything from being repeatedly called, I don't know, bitch, I will rape you, to revenge porn and everything in between, right? And when I say abuse, I use it as a shorthand for all of these different kinds of experiences, the whole spectrum. And the women interviewed were very particular about the fact that they did not want to be part of a victim narrative. They did not think of themselves as victims, and it was just something that they were quite normalized to. The other finding was that despite a high degree of abuse, women continued to use online spaces, whether it was for political expression or sexual expression, two of the most provocative uses of the internet for women. It's really interesting, actually. An actress called Soha Ali Khan was really targeted. I mean, she's often looked at as, I don't know, TV actress and stuff, and when she had opinions about Brexit, she was highly targeted. So even if you kind of cross that line between what expression you're trying to make, whether it's like, you know, if you're known for sexual expression and you toe the line towards talking about anything political, then you're a big target, right? The other important thing that came out, which was very interesting, is that there is a hierarchy in the types of harassment as well. So if it is images, then it is considered a lot more serious than if it is text. And this is both in the perception of harm of women themselves, and also of how the law looks at it. To give you an example, in Mangalore, a year back, Mangalore is different from Bangalore. It's a coastal area in the south of India. So there, a college student was photographed with a beer, like a college girl was photographed with a beer along with a friend at the beach. And this image was circulated on WhatsApp, and she got expelled from her college. Right? So if it's an image, it has a lot higher consequence, I guess, than if somebody would have messaged saying, I saw your daughter or like your student drinking beer at the beach. So, so while a lot of women who were interviewed laugh off rape threats, they somewhat remember better images that upset them, whether it's like, you know, morphed images of themselves onto naked bodies or illicit videography, all of that. I think this is also indicative of how, I mean, the fact that text-based verbal abuse, even if it is really, even if it is quite bad, it's not taken as seriously as image-based harassment, also because, I mean, this is symptomatic of how normalized verbal abuse has also become. It's just part of your everyday life. Yeah, so the next finding that I would like to go to is the parallels between street harassment and online harassment, and this has a lot of lessons for us. One, that ignoring abuse does not make it go away. It does not help counter the narrative that public spaces, whether it's online or offline, are only for masculine identities. Second, that the female body as a site of attack. Now, whether or not that is successful in being used as a silencing tool depends on person to person, but very often women's bodies, women's sexualities are used as the site of attack, as in offline, as in street harassment. Third, women do not resort to legal measures unless it is as a last resort. And this is true offline as well, right? Every second person that whistles at you, you're not going to run off to the police. That's, I mean, you can also feel harassed if someone's staring at you, say, I don't know, like so many things, and the police might not be the right person to tackle that, the right people to tackle that, and also a high degree of mistrust in the institution of, I mean, institutional ways to tackle this. And also, of course, there's a lot of victim blaming, and I see that it's also a pattern in other parts of the world. So there's that. So that was back in 2013. 3 years on, what has changed? There is a lot more recognition from the government. There is a lot more recognition from law enforcement agencies that this is a big issue. Recently, the Ministry of Women and Child Development released the draft national policy for women and asked for comments. We can't see the text very well, but it does very definitely mention that there need to be changes within regulatory frameworks and in tackling the new forms of violence that technology enables. It does use a bit of protectionist language, but I mean, I'll come to why this should not be the focus in any case. I mean, it's really heartening that the law enforcement is picking up on it. And a reason for that could also be the fact that a lot of female politicians who have been occupying online spaces have been the target of such abuse. If you follow Indian politics, you will know that Smriti Irani, who is the current textiles minister, and she was the human resources development minister until a while back. She used to also be a television personality, so anything that she did right or wrong would be awfully targeted. And I mean, the target of the specificities of what the abuse was about would also very often be the fact that she used to be a television actress or some sexualized content, right? So yeah, that could be one of the reasons that there's increasing visibility of the problem. And also mainstream media journalists are also targeted heavily. Recently, the Minister for Women and Child Development also started a hashtag called I Am Trolled Help to kind of get a fast track access to the minister if there are women who are being distressed by this problem. But very predictably, this hashtag also got trolled, and I think if the ministry did any research about this fact, they would kind of know that this has not worked. Like, we tried that back in 2013 with a hashtag called Misogyny Alert, and more recently, I think Take Back the Tech hashtag also got awfully trolled. So that's not very useful anymore, but it shows that the problem is being engaged with. And at the UN level, the Commission on the Status of Women also recognized the issue. But what we found from the research, which I'd like to stress again, is that laws cannot be the primary solution to online abuse. This is because there's a wide range of abuse that does not match up to legal scrutiny, and you do not want that kind of stuff banned as well. So legislative measures are not equipped to deal with somebody saying, I wish you die. So until there is more clarity within organizations pushing for governments to come in, or the governments themselves, it is better to be general than to be specific, which is why the draft policy for women that I showed you earlier, the language there was pretty general, but that's, I mean, it's better to be general than to be specific with like really bad solutions. I did speak about how law enforcement is not the first port of call for women in India, which is also the reason why laws cannot be pushed. I mean, it's best to not put all your energies and resources towards pushing for more laws. And often laws are moralistic. Often laws do not take consent into account and end up overreaching into saying you should not post any sexual content, all of these issues. The other thing with laws is that you can't always track abusers on the internet. You also, sometimes a lot of these abusers live in different jurisdictions, and we do not have good mechanisms to address this with MLATs and whatnot. Therefore, it's also not good to create false hope in the, weapon of law. The next group of people, intermediaries, they're also not famous for being allies. This is because most of them co-opt laws in the region for their own standards of what's acceptable and what's not. And the problem again with this is a whole lot of things that, a whole lot of speech that should not be illegal keeps happening, which is nonetheless silencing women, all the same. And a lot of platforms also over-censor in moral panic and do not have policies that take into account experiences of women. So Facebook real name policy is quite infamous for this. There have been, there's a lot of experience in India about how the real name policy has been backfiring and is being used as a silencing tool against women, but this has not been taken into account. Earlier when I was talking about Qandil Baloch, Facebook and Instagram have banned her profile after her death, which is, yeah, I know, right? It's back. You can talk about it.
Just like recording.
So Qandil's page was originally taken down because she didn't have any legacy contact, and the Instagram profile was taken down as a mistake as well. We, as an organization, the Digital Rights Foundation, reached out to them and asked what had happened, and they basically wrote back and said that, the page was taken down because there's no one to run it. So they can't just keep the profile up. So the profile and the Instagram page are both back up now, but they're frozen, like nobody can post it. On the page or anything, but the pages are back up because we sort of pushed for them to come back. So they weren't taken down, they weren't censored. We originally personally thought that as well, but that's not the case. So.
But I also don't know if Facebook does that normally as soon as, there has been a public personality who dies and you immediately find out what pages they administer and take it down.
I think what they usually do is they put the bracket in memory or something.
They've done that now.
Yeah.
They've done that now, but originally they didn't do that.
Yeah.
They just disappeared without any warning.
All right, awesome. Thanks for the clarification. So anyway, besides that, Facebook often says that they don't have support for regional languages like Pashto or Kannada or other languages, right? But there have been very prominent activists in India like Kavita Krishnan who have been targeted pretty badly in Hindi. So I don't know what excuses some intermediaries can have for still not having support in like languages like Hindi anymore, right? But some intermediaries have been making more meaningful attempts. A reporter from The Wired called Laura Hudson reported about this, and it was pretty cool, that Riot Games, which runs this game called League of Legends, has better ways of dealing with abuse. They launched something called a player behavior team, where they had people who were trained, who were experts in neuroscience, cognitive science, and psychology, to kind of look at behavioral profiles of all the users and kind of see what the issue is and what they can uncover. And what they saw was that nastiness was a huge issue, and so then banning was not really a great solution, right? Because they would not have players anymore. But they made some changes in the design of the game itself. Like, for example, they removed the default option of opposing players being able to chat with each other, and that reduced abuse to a huge extent. It became like an opt-in thing. When penalties were imposed on users, there would be explicit reasons why such penalties were imposed to the user. So this ended up in a lot of behavioral change from the user side. And also the policing responsibility was left with a tribunal that was the community of players themselves. So this had a lot of really good results for the user base and for abuse on their website, on their game. The other example of this is also Xbox, which uses user feedback to kind of rate profiles. So there's green for good behavior, yellow for needs improvement, and red for like avoid me. So this is about the intermediaries. So essentially, if law cannot be the primary solution, if intermediaries are not reliable allies, the story lies elsewhere is what we found from our study. Two of really interesting approaches that have worked are community-led approaches and counter-speech. Similar to a lot of offline feminist movements, a lot of community building and solidarity on platforms that you occupy on the internet have helped in women remaining in those spaces. But it also is worth mentioning that a lot of support groups often devolve into the same kinds of mobs that it's trying to tackle. So obviously, more compassionate approaches are better than less compassionate approaches. So that's to be cautioned against. There's also counter-speech, where either engaging head-on with your abuser or naming and shaming people has really worked in the Indian context. But this is again not available to all women. It's a kind of privilege because I guess there's consequences to engaging with your abuser. And say if you're from a really conservative family, then the consequences of your picture being morphed onto a naked body is a lot more than if your family and friends are going to be like, just screw that kind, right? So that's about the approaches. So what's also very useful to look at if you're interested in this issue is at the last IGF, there was a best practices forum on online abuse and gender-based violence against women, which is a really useful document on the kind of solutions that we should be working towards, and guiding a lot of guiding principles. And they also stress on the importance of awareness and literacy, along with increased research in this area that's required. And in that context, we're coming out with a resource that concentrates on non-intermediary, non-law enforcement kind of approaches in furtherance to our Don't Let It Stand study in August. So do keep an eye out for that. Thanks.
Very important points you have raised here, Nayantara. Thank you so much. And there is the fact that we cannot ignore is that in the developing countries like Nepal and India, when most women are unaware about their women right. So here the problem is most cyber war or the online violence against women goes unreported. And also it was found that the law enforcement agencies and the courts have failed to take the appropriate action for cyber war. in 74% of 86 countries surveyed. So we can imagine this scenario there. And that's something to take care of and a challenge too. And not to forget, women often prefer not to report the cyber war for fear of social repercussion. So moving forward, I would like to ask Mr. Shriti Premaji to talk about the issue. Shriti Premaji is a blogger and a social activist. He's the steering committee member of the Dynamic Coalition of the Internet Rights and Principal Coalition. Professionally working as a consultant for ICT for Development, he works with various private and government agencies in Nepal, founding member of Internet Society Nepal chapter. He's the member of the research committee of the Federation of Computer Association of Nepal.
Yeah, thank you, Sujina. Today I'm very happy because I'm in the minority group, I guess. Like 4 women speakers are there, and I'm the only man speaker. So it feels good, I guess. And the thing that I have to share is we from Raise News, we did this survey last year during the Orange Week. So we did a survey online using the online platform, and we collected some information about violence against women and the social behavior of people using social media in Nepal. And what we found there was with the survey was most of the people who were using social media were unaware about their rights. They didn't know what their rights were, and they were just they were just like socializing. They never read any of the privacy issues. They were just sharing photos, pictures. So I think like when you especially talk about violence against women online, then a more specific part is concerned with the awareness. And it is hugely lacking in countries like Nepal, least developed countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, India, even in India, I think. So our survey had a recommendation that findings that women need more awareness in terms of their rights, the social media awareness should be there. And more often people were just using it for fun, so they were not aware about what could go wrong. So this was a field where we focused, and we submitted the report to the Best Practice Forum as well last year. And I think even in Nepal there were a few incidents, specifically with one of the actors, Priyanka Karki, who took it to media and expressed her feelings that every time when she uploaded a picture, she would get all those harsh, abusive comments, and it was just insane. People would just comment whether she was wearing a Western dress or whether she was wearing a Nepali dress. People would just abuse her. The comments would go on. So she took it to media, and like she expressed her feelings. And apart from that, these social media issues are quite coming up in countries like Nepal. So thank you.
Thank you, Shriti Premaji. So now the floor is open for if you have any questions or comments.
Hello. Thank you. My question is regarding legal services, about the availability, quality, and willingness of lawyers to take on some of these cases. Gwen, you mentioned, I think, something about 40% of the cases go to court. Nayantara, you said that there's very few do, or very few women take legal action. But my question, to all the panelists, but you two mentioned it in particular, I'd like to know, are there lawyers that are, if women do move forward with it, are there lawyers who are, is there any problems with unwillingness to take the cases among the legal community? when they do move forward, what's the quality of legal services like and the availability of legal services?
I thank you for the question. I think it's a very important issue because oftentimes those revenge porn victims might feel ashamed, so they rather not to take the case further. But I think the trend has changed in recent years, especially now people are paying more attention on women's rights in Taiwan, for instance. So in the civil society in Taiwan, specifically speaking, the civil groups are really vibrant here, and there's a NGO called, I think it's called Legal Assistance Association. They have lawyers, qualified lawyers. They provide free consultations to victims under the revenge porn, and also for other social issues. For instance, when there was a huge media corporate company trying to, corporate companies trying to purchase a huge land in southern Taiwan, and then it might cause some damage to the environment, they actively provide assistance. So they not only provide assistance to victims under revenge porn or domestic violence, but also covering other issues. So it is a positive sign, I would say, that people are providing help, but the question is, how does the civil society should do to encourage victims to take further actions and not hiding themselves in the dark? And that's the problem a lot of people are trying to tackle. And so, yeah, maybe other panelists will have more interesting stories to share.
Like I said, there is this hierarchy, right? If you've been verbally abused, very often you do not want to go to the law, go to court for it. And it's also not as if lawyers advocate going to courts as a useful form of redressal either. However, there are traditional women's rights organizations. I know for a fact that Prajwala is one of them in India that takes up these issues and at least like forwards it to people that might be able to help. So there's nobody that specializes in taking up cases of online abuse. There are people that specialize, I mean, there are people that help out in cases of revenge porn and things like that, but very often since it's also in the but since it's also in the abused's best interest to not want to go to court for it, it's really rare instances, I would say.
So we did a research on access to justice for APC, covering 7 countries, including Philippines, Pakistan, Colombia. I forgot the other countries. One problem is on forensic evidence, especially Gul is here. Forensic evidence, especially if countries like, for example, Philippines do not have the capacity to address forensic evidence. Second is territorial jurisdiction. So, excuse me. So, for example, if there is absence of law and there is no ongoing arrangement between, for example, Philippines and another country, then even though they were able to successfully identify the perpetrator, it would be very difficult for us to bring that person to trial, going back to the Philippines. There are actually an increasing number of women, actually, who wanted to report. And it would entirely depend on the sensitivity capacity of the investigators. So, for example, when it comes to the police, when it comes to the prosecutors. So if they're not familiar with the law, and I think that has been the majority of the experiences of most of the 7 countries as a result of the studies, that the challenge is the police will not report the case because for them it's an online case. I mean, it's not a criminal act. Because, so for example, for the Philippines, you consider that act as an evidence. So for example, there is an abuse happened between the wife and the husband through online. So you use that as an evidence. So there's no crime to penalize the stalking, for example, online, no, but you can use that as an evidence to say that there's stalking happening through offline. So you're now using the online part only as part of the evidence. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, but I think it has been pointed out that we don't want more laws, because sometimes laws also are constrict spaces for women.
Hi, I'm Serene from Malaysia, from Empower. We are a women's rights organization. I think this is a very important issue, which is happening in almost all countries. And the issues on revenge porn is getting more and more serious. But I think maybe we should rethink the terms revenge porn, because the word porn immediately puts women in a less advantaged position. I know Google uses different word, and APC, Association for Progressive Communications, they're using a different words in their report as well. And I think when it comes to revenge porn, there are also cases in Malaysia where women go to police, but often the police reply would be, you consent to the photo, so it is not a crime. So there's a need to, I think the solution is not to come up with more laws, because if you look at the current provision, at least in Malaysia, this law is actually applicable in the online context. If you're looking at it if you're looking at the issues as a form of violence against women, it is in fact applicable. So there's a need to educate not just the public, the women themselves, but the police, the law enforcers, the judges on recognizing the issues, rather than giving more powers to the governments in creating broad definitions of law. The other issues that I noticed which is happening is that often online violence against women is an extension of the much broader issues of gender discriminations and violence against women, especially when it comes to domestic violence. We see, say for example, court order was given to prohibit the husband from getting in contact with the wife. But what happened is it's vague about whether you are allowed to WhatsApp your wife or just send abusive comments. So there's this movement of online violence and then to offline. So it's not just, sometimes it's not just online. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, even in Nepal, there are a few of the organizations that do provide legal aid, but since most of these cases, people, women, they do not come up. So most of the cases are not reported. And a few of the cases that are there, like as I mentioned, the actor herself, she took it to the media. So, the thing is, we do not have exact rules and regulations regarding this, but there are few of the organizations that are providing free legal aid.
Well, I want to add here something. So, I'm also running a Facebook group, and I am giving a free legal aid. So, most of the times when a victim of women come to us to seek a justice, and then when we go to the police station to file a case first, so the first thing that they will say is this has happened in reality. What they said is to a victim, you are pretty, you are young, so this will happen to you. So in our society, the patriarchal mindset is a major problem for us. The people still think that women are considered as secondary citizen. So men are always the breadwinners, and women have to suffer. They have to surrender. Even the police, who are responsible for protecting our rights, they say bluntly that you're pretty, you're young, and this has to happen to you. And we need to convince them. We have to tell them that this is going wrong. These are our rights, and you have to protect us. This is a real scenario in Nepal. Thank you. Any more questions or comments?
Okay, sorry. Maureen Hilliard from the beautiful island of the Cook Islands in the South Pacific. I say that because I know that, you know, when you sort of like think of Pacific Islands and you think of how idyllic they are, I just wanted to raise, and I'm glad it was brought up there, is that we don't, in the Pacific, I haven't heard of any sort of situations that actually sort of like where social media is used in the same sort of like way. But I've actually sort of like been, a project that I was actually involved in very recently was gender equality and domestic violence. And the Australian government has poured millions of dollars into the Pacific to overcome a real sort of like an epidemic of violence, domestic violence. That is, it's a hidden statistic. And it's really just sort of like coming to the fore now. And I think that, like for example, in a casual conversation I was having with someone from Telecom who informed me that in the Cook Islands, 60% of the internet use in the island is porn. And that we don't, I mean, our government doesn't enforce any legislation or any policies or anything related to that. Every time we sort of like want to raise this, it's actually sort of, you know, it's cold-shouldered. And so, but the thing is that while this is happening, you know, we know that this, you know, the evidence can obviously be found, of course, but that becomes a hidden statistic. The one that isn't hidden is the fact that there is, you know, a high level of domestic violence. But the domestic violence in our country, we've only, I mean, there's only 14,000 people on our island, so you know, like, kind of like it's not so great. But across the Pacific, it's quite bad, and it's not, you know, there are a lot of culture, you know, like I guess just the same as in your countries where the culture actually encourages, you know, it encourages the attitudes, which, you know, are going to be difficult to change. But I sort of like, you know, sort of say that, you know, we've all got our own little mooncakes, you know, you know, there are messages sort of like being, you know, but they're under, you know, they're underground basically. So, you know, are you seeing a relevance between the sorts of things that's happening and ordinary domestic violence itself? Is that sort of like a prevalent behaviour in your countries as well? Do they go hand in hand, perhaps?
Thanks for your comment. It's really, really encouraging to see that in Cook Island there are people working on the gender equality issue, although it seems like it's in its initial stage, because in the society in general, people still do not think gender equality is a problem. And I think it took Taiwan decades to achieve where we have now today. In the past, when couples divorce, usually it was the husband could get the custody, and the thing did not get changed until late 80s. So I think it took a lot of effort, not only from civil society but also from government and a group of dedicated people committed to this problem. And I would say education is the key, and also taking international awareness as a measures to raise awareness within the society could be quite helpful. So a lot of time, civil society in Taiwan, they took foreign countries example, mostly from Western countries, as a way to encourage young women to take actions to combat this issue. So I think that's a way definitely maybe you know, everyone here could look at the problem together, and whether there's a possibility that all civil society from different countries can form this platform together to raise awareness in Pacific Islands could be a way to look at. I know that Australian government pays huge attention on this issue as well. So maybe we can have a private conversation later because I happen to have some connection with the Australian government. Yeah, but I think culture is definitely the root to a lot of problems, not only cyberspace, but women violence, but also domestic issues. And I would say I'm glad to see that a lot of young women, they are taking action today. I think a few years back, there was a young actress / singer. She got a lot of naked photo leaked on the internet. And instead of hiding herself in the dark, he stepped out and then spoke out for herself, saying, "These are my photos, and you guys do not have the right to share the photos online." So we do need a lot of support and people like them to help other victims when they do not enjoy this kind of media exposure, to allow those young women, or not just young women, like every victim, know that it is okay to share what happened to you, but the society as a whole will support you. I think that's very, very important. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to respond to that, saying that is true of India as well. There are these very true connections between like offline issues around violence against women and how it reflects in the online spaces. And it's not true only of rural backward areas, but even in urban areas, specific types of uses of technology are legitimate compared to others. Like, and sometimes in a lot of places in the country, it's an equivalent of loitering, because if you're on your phones too much and like no one knows what you're up to, then that's kind of a threatening prospect. So there is that connection that we've seen in our study as well. And yeah, I just want to say that.
So for the Philippines is supposed to be one of the most gender equal in Asia. And if you look at the official statistics, say the UN, the incidence of domestic abuse, of offline abuse, is relatively low, like 4%, 15%. But then you have these contradicting statistics which say that like in the capital, for instance, like 70% of all of the online abuse complaints come from women. So I mean, I think it's easy to see that when it comes to online violence against women, it's an expression of an unequal society. It's an expression of offline discrimination. So I think part of the problem that we have in the Philippines is not really the lack of incidents, but the lack of data on the incidents. And I think that goes for a lot of countries.
Sorry, I realized I totally missed making the point that I wanted to make and where I was going. I was going to get at the right to anonymity in the context of incidents like domestic abuse being reflected online, and how it is absolutely not being given the importance that it requires. And in the narrative of national security or terrorism or whatever else, the issue of anonymity for domestic violence survivors and a lot of different kinds of marginalized groups is not being talked about enough. There was an entire panel yesterday about it, so I didn't bring that up as a strategy. But yeah.
Raj Singh from the Internet Society. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One is that, in a lot of our cultural contexts in the Pacific, in parts of Asia, and I think, sorry, I'm just trying to read your name from here, Sajina? You, I think, mentioned the status of women in Nepal as, I think what you were trying to say is they're basically second-class citizens in their own country. A lot of that, of course, is historical, or has historical or culturally historic context to it. So, to my mind, I think, one way to try and solve that issue is that, to teach a male that, violence against women is not okay. Yes, the elders can try and do that. Yes, maybe some of his peers may try and do that. But I think it really needs to start as an education issue in schools. Teaching the kids that males and females or other genders are they have equal rights. Okay, it's not just about the patriarchal society that you belong to, that you come from as part of your heritage. It's nice to maintain your heritage, but The world has changed. We don't live in the medieval ages anymore. So there is a need for our education systems to ensure that is taught in the schools, be it under, I don't want to call it a morality class, or ethics class, whatever it is, but I think that needs to be part of the curriculum. And in the Pacific in particular, I think we fail miserably on that. But same things in many parts of Asia as well. So that's just one thing I just wanted to say, that, teachings, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So if someone has come up in that sort of sphere of thought and violence and whatnot, it's very hard to change a person who's 30, 40, 50 years old. But if you start when that person is very young, you've got a good chance to make a difference as that person grows up, and then that person becomes a peer and a colleague of others. And then there's a cycle that eventuates out of that. Second thing, just a slightly personal, non-topical comment about Australia. Yes, I live in Australia. We spend a lot of money on violence in other countries, trying to prevent that, but we can't stop institutional violence in our own country. Some of them have had the reports recently.
Seems like we do not have any more queries or comments. Anybody want to share some experiences or anything? Okay. Now, as we have come to the end of the session, I would like to thank all the panelists for their valuable insights. And thank you all for your active participation. Hopefully the session was beneficial for all of us. Thank you so much, and have a good evening or good afternoon. Thank you.
No, I'm based in Manila. Yes.
Just a quick announcement for this